In June 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus bought their dream home at 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey, a beautiful 1905 Victorian house that cost them $1.3 million. 3 days after closing, before the family had even moved in, they opened the mailbox and found a letter. It was signed, "The Watcher." "I have been watching 657 Boulevard for decades," it read. "My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s and 1930s, and my father watched in the 1950s and 1960s. It is now my time. I have been waiting for the right family to fill it." More letters followed. "Have you found all that the house holds? Will the young blood you have brought to me help fill the house with the life it needs?" The letters described the Broaddus children by name and referred to them as young blood. The family, terrified, never moved in. They sued the previous owners, who had received a letter from the Watcher before the sale and told them nothing. They tried to demolish the house. Neighbors blocked them. They eventually sold at a massive loss. The letters stopped. A neighbor was publicly identified as a suspect but was never charged. The identity of the Watcher was never proven in court, and no one was ever arrested. On February 19, 2013, hotel staff at the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles found the body of 21-year-old Elisa Lam, a Canadian student, floating in one of the rooftop water tanks. The tanks had been supplying drinking water to guests for 19 days. The investigation turned on an elevator surveillance recording released by police and seen by millions worldwide. Lam pressed every floor button, ducked into the corner of the elevator, appeared to speak to someone who was not there, made slow, strange movements with her hands, and then the elevator doors, which should have closed automatically, simply would not close while she was inside. After she walked out of frame, the doors finally shut. Lam had a documented history of bipolar disorder, and the medical examiner ruled her death an accidental drowning. But the rooftop access required a key and an alarm code, and no one could explain how a young woman alone, barefoot, made it through multiple locked access points to reach a sealed rooftop water tank whose hatch required significant physical effort to open and close. The surveillance footage's time-stamp was also questioned. Nothing about Elisa Lam's death was ever satisfactorily explained. On December 26, 1900, the supply ship Hesperus arrived at the Flannan Isles, a remote cluster of rocky outcroppings off the Scottish coast, to deliver provisions to the lighthouse. As the ship approached, the crew immediately noticed something wrong. The light was dark. No one came to meet them at the landing dock. When they entered the lighthouse, it was completely empty. 3 experienced lighthouse keepers, James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur, had vanished without a trace. Their oilskins and boots were still hanging inside. The last log entry, made December 15, noted that MacArthur was, uncharacteristically, very excited. Entries before that described storms unlike anything the men had ever seen, and one noted the men seemed genuinely distressed. The official inquiry concluded the keepers had probably been swept off an exposed ledge by a freak wave. But weather records for December 15 did not support storm conditions severe enough to endanger 3 experienced men on a station they knew intimately, and no explanation accounted for why all 3 would have gone to a wave-exposed ledge together without their oilskins. No bodies were ever found. On the night of June 6, 1992, Suzanne Streeter and Stacy McCall, both 18, attended their high school graduation party in Springfield, Missouri, and arranged to spend the night at Suzanne's house. When Stacy's parents arrived to pick her up the following morning, the house was empty. The front door was unlocked, lights were on, and all 3 women's purses, car keys, and shoes were still inside. Suzanne's 47-year-old mother, Cheryl Levitt, was also gone. A broken decorative globe on the porch had been carefully swept up and placed in a dustpan. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no forced entry. The 3 dogs left in the backyard were unharmed and silent. Over 30 years later, no trace of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Streeter, or Stacy McCall has ever been found. No arrest has ever been made. The FBI investigated. Multiple suspects were questioned and cleared. In 2023, investigators announced they believed the women might be buried on a property connected to a known violent offender. A search found nothing conclusive. The Springfield Three remain 3 of the most inexplicable vanishings in American criminal history. On November 15, 1966, 2 couples driving near Point Pleasant, West Virginia, reported seeing a large creature standing near an abandoned power plant, man-shaped, with enormous folded wings and glowing red eyes, which then pursued their car at speeds they estimated above 100 miles per hour. Over the next 13 months, more than 100 residents of the Point Pleasant area reported similar encounters, a winged figure with red eyes, sometimes hovering silently over bridges, sometimes seen near homes at night. On December 15, 1967, the Silver Bridge connecting Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio, collapsed during evening rush hour, killing 46 people, one of the worst bridge disasters in American history. The Mothman sighting stopped the same day. The author John Keel documented the full 13-month wave in his 1975 book The Mothman Prophecies, drawing a direct connection between the creature and the disaster. Engineers determined the Silver Bridge collapsed due to a corroded I-bar link that had been slowly failing for years. What the more than 100 witnesses across those 13 months actually saw, and why the sightings ended the day the bridge fell, has never been explained. On Australia Day, January 26, 1966, 3 siblings took a short bus trip alone to Glenelg Beach in South Australia: Jane Beaumont, aged 9, her sister Arna, aged 7, and their brother Grant, aged 4. They had made this trip before. They were expected home on the noon bus. They never came. Witnesses at the beach that day reported seeing the 3 children in the company of a tall, fair-haired young man. The children appeared comfortable with him, not frightened. Witnesses described them eating meat pies. Their mother knew she had not given them enough money for pies, meaning someone else had bought them. Their father waited at the bus stop throughout the afternoon. No trace of the 3 children was ever found. A Dutch psychic named Gerard Croiset traveled to Australia twice, each time claiming to know where the children were buried, and both searches found nothing. A man later investigated in connection with the Zodiac killings in California was also considered a person of interest. Nearly 60 years later, the Beaumont Children remain Australia's most haunting unsolved disappearance. No bodies, no confirmed suspect, no answer. On August 20, 2007, a girl walking a beach on Jedediah Island, British Columbia, found a man's running shoe washed ashore. Inside it was a human foot. 11 days later, another foot turned up on a nearby island. Then another, and another, and another. By 2023, more than 20 detached human feet in athletic shoes had washed up along the Salish Sea coastline of British Columbia and Washington state, with no corresponding bodies and no clear explanation for why feet in particular were separating and surfacing. Investigators determined the separations were not the result of violence. Natural decomposition in seawater causes joints to disarticulate, and that modern running shoes with foam soles are specifically buoyant enough to float long after the rest of a body sinks and dissolves. Many feet were eventually matched, through DNA, to missing persons who had died in the water, accidents, suicides, a victim of the 2004 Asian tsunami. But the pattern, more than 20 feet, the clustering, the ongoing arrivals, has never fully resolved, and the feet that remain unidentified are still waiting to be claimed. At around 3 in the morning on August 7, 1994, a gelatinous substance began falling from the sky over Oakville, Washington, a town of several hundred people in Grays Harbor County. It fell like rain. Over the following 3 weeks, the same substance fell 6 more times over the same area. The blobs were translucent, about the size of grains of rice, and they coated everything. Within days of the first fall, a large number of Oakville residents, along with virtually every cat and dog that had been outside that night, became seriously ill, extreme fatigue, dizziness, blurred vision, difficulty breathing. One resident's dog died. Samples were collected and sent to the Washington State Department of Health. Analysis confirmed the substance contained human white blood cells and possibly bacterial cells. No analysis ever conclusively identified what the material was, where it originated, or why it fell repeatedly and only over this one small town. Military testing debris, jellyfish fragments from Air Force bombing runs over the nearby Pacific, and stranger theories were each raised and each dismissed. The Oakville Blobs have never been identified. Beginning in 1960, 2 Italian brothers, Achille and Giovanni Battista Giudicacordiglia, built a homemade listening station in Turin called Tory Burt, and claimed to have intercepted a series of Soviet space transmissions that the USSR never officially acknowledged. In May 1961, just weeks after Yuri Gagarin's historic orbit, they released a recording they said captured a woman's voice in Russian, apparently transmitting from orbit. She was saying she was burning up, that she could see flames, asking repeatedly if she would survive re-entry. Then the signal stopped. Soviet authorities denied the recording existed. Subsequent analysis over the following decades never conclusively determined whether the Tory Burt recordings were real intercepts of Soviet cosmonauts who died before their missions were acknowledged, misidentified civilian transmissions, or fabrications. Soviet-era archives declassified after 1991 did confirm that several early Soviet space fatalities were actively suppressed for political reasons. Whether the Giudicacordiglia recordings captured any of those suppressed deaths remains, to this day, genuinely disputed. On February 25, 1957, a teenager checking animal traps in northeast Philadelphia found a large cardboard box set back from the road in a wooded lot on Fox Chase Road. Inside was the naked body of a small boy, estimated to be between 4 and 6 years old, wrapped in a plaid flannel blanket. He had been beaten. His body also showed signs of significant malnutrition alongside recent care. His fingernails and hair had been freshly trimmed before death. Despite one of the largest missing child investigations in Philadelphia history, no one came forward to claim him. His face was reconstructed and distributed nationwide, printed on grocery bags, shown on television. Nobody came. For 65 years, he was known only as America's unknown child. In December 2023, Philadelphia police announced that genealogical DNA analysis had identified him as Joseph Augustus Sorelli, a name confirmed against historical birth records. His parents are both long dead. Who beat him, who placed him in that box, and why no one came forward in 65 years, none of it has ever been answered.